a CNN special presentation. A final farewell to Ronald Reagan. Reporting from Washington, BLITZER and PAULA ZAHN.
Good evening and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us for our special coverage of the nation's final farewell to President Ronald Reagan.
What we're seeing now is the presidential jet bringing the coffin, the casket of President Reagan to the Point Mugu Naval Air Station, not far from the Presidential Library. It's about to fly over, if it hasn't yet, fly over the Presidential Library in Simi Valley. We just saw it continue to make that symbolic gesture over this library, the flags flying, Paula, at half-staff. This is where the 40th President of the United States will be buried at sunset tonight on the Pacific.
And the feeling of that ceremony, which we'll see unfold in about an hour and a half from now, will be much different in feeling from the grandeur of what we witnessed at the National Cathedral a little bit earlier today. Let's go to Candy Crowley, who's standing by at the Reagan Presidential Library right now to fill us in on what the tone of that service will be like. Hi, Candy.
Put the battle in the Republic playing in the background. It gave me chills.
Paula, I don't know if you can hear me at this point. There are a lot of people here and a lot of static in our earplugs, in which we use it to listen to you. But let me kind of set the scene for you. This will be very close friends of the Reagans, as well as a lot of old Hollywood friends. We have seen Kirk Douglas's name on the list of those expected. Merv Griffin, obviously. We've also seen people like Pat Sajak, the game show host, Charlton Heston. We have so far spotted Tom Selleck is here. Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, is here, but also close friends, names like Bloomingdale and Annenberg, longtime friends of the Reagans. They will be here. This is a much more intimate setting than what we saw today at the National Cathedral, but there will still be a number of flourishes befitting a president. A 21-gun salute. There'll be a flyover of F-18s. So there still will be those sorts of things, but the feel here is very much more one of family and old friends, whereas in Washington it was sort of a salute to a president, a salute to the leader of the free world. This is a goodbye to a father, this is a goodbye to a husband, and a goodbye to a friend. In fact, we will hear for the first time since their father's death from the three surviving Reagan children, Patty, Michael, and Ron, so they're expected to make some comments here as well. The burial, I don't know how much you've seen of this. This is the most gorgeous spot. The president had said he wanted a sundown ceremony. He will get it. The sun has been shining in the bluest of skies all day long. As I am looking sort of into the camera, right behind where the camera is where the president will be laid to rest in a sort of a curved aesthetic, where he is looking directly west. This is a man, of course, who came from Illinois and headed west to find his fame and fortune, and there was that little eight years in Washington, but this was where his heart is. This is where he will be buried, and as requested, he will be facing west. Paul and Walt?
I guess when you look back, thank you, Candy, on what unfolded here in Washington, the skies were very gray and ugly, and there's something, I guess, appropriate about those people attending the service later today to be able to see a California sunset, the sunset that this president was so drawn to.
Appropriately enough, Paul, a beautiful day in California. What we're seeing now is this U.S. Air Force presidential jet carrying the casket of Ronald Reagan to Point Mugu, the Naval Air Station in California, not far from the Presidential Library. This is a plane that has undertaken this approximately 5-hour flight that left earlier today from Andrews Air Force Base.
A flight that's about an hour faster than most people usually travel on a commercial flight. On board the flight, besides some of the family members, on board is Margaret Thatcher, who delivered a magnificent eulogy early today, talked in very personal terms about her friendship with the president, talked about the president's optimism and his greatest gift being able to cheer us all up. There was some concern she wouldn't be able to make this trip. She has suffered a series of mild strokes, and she, in fact, pre-recorded the eulogy, and we saw that play out on videotape today, and her doctors recently had not allowed her to give any speeches or travel at all. So it's quite remarkable that, as frail as she is, that it was very important for her to show up in Washington today and get on this plane and fly cross-country.
And speaking of frail, Paula, perhaps most important aboard This aircraft is Nancy Reagan, who has gone through these past several days with such dignity, such charm, such poise. I suspect, though, as we get closer to this final event in this nearly week-long period of national mourning here in the United States, it will become increasingly more difficult in the next few hours. This is the plane that will touch down momentarily at Point Mugu at the Naval Air Station. We'll watch it land. Sienna Stelna Gutierrez is over there already watching this land as well. Stelna, tell us what we can anticipate once the plane taxis to a stop, the casket is removed, and the former First Lady emerges.
Yes, Wolf. In fact, we see that that SAM 28,000 has approached Point Mugu. In fact, we believe that it has landed. We can hear it off in the distance right now as it pulls over onto the flight line here at Point Mugu. We're told, Wolf, that once...
Has now landed. We're seeing it live. It has touched down on the runway at Point Mugu, and it's obviously going to taxi for a while before it stops. But what will happen immediately as it stops and the people aboard this plane begin to emerge and the casket is removed?
Well, exactly what will happen is that there is a vehicle here which has a loading device to move the casket from the aircraft to the presidential hearse, which is waiting here on the flight line. There will be military pallbearers which will pass between two lines of color guard, and then a Marine band will begin to play God Bless America. The president will receive a 21-gun salute by 4 howitzers that are out here in the distance from the flight line. Then the motorcade will begin its journey to the Reagan Library, but not before, Wolf, everyone is seated, particularly Nancy Reagan. And I wanted to mention that it really is an amazing sight out here. There are thousands of people. We were here early today, just a few military folks. Now there are thousands that are lining this area. You see sailors from the USS Reagan who are here. There are 8 of them which were chosen to be here. They are going to be joined by local dignitaries who will greet the procession. And then you see many children out here, military children holding flags, waving flags. You also see Secret Service. The security here is incredibly tight. They've made several sweeps through the area throughout the day. And just an amazing sight. Many people waiting to greet the First Lady and the procession.
Thelma, what has been striking to Wolf and me over the last several days is to hear the number of young people who, many of whom weren't even born when Ronald Reagan was serving as the president, who felt the need to in some way pay their respects to the president, either at the library or perhaps even out at the Naval Air Station today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, I spoke with many children. I asked them, do you know who President Reagan is? Do you know who he was, what he stood for? And oddly enough, they had talked to their parents, and they said, you know, I wasn't around when he was president, but they told me that he was a good president, and that's why I'm here.
So let's stand by. We're going to be getting back to you. Our senior analyst, Jeff Greenfield, is watching all of this together with all of us. Jeff, just if you think about it in historic terms, to take this casket from the nation's capital in Washington and bring it back to California, a flight of approximately a little bit more than 5 hours. Earlier presidents who went through these state funerals, sometimes it took days, in fact weeks, to get their caskets back to their final resting grounds.
Well, the most particular one was the body of Abraham Lincoln, who went on a train from Washington up to New York, through Buffalo, and it took all in all more than 16 days. They don't even know how many people saw it, because at every big city they would take the casket and they would have a ceremony at a city hall. They would have a kind of parade, is perhaps the wrong word. And that Lincoln funeral train was one of the most searing moments of post-Civil War America. There were literally a couple of million people who remember that as one of the great moments, one of the most important moments of their lives. And this is obviously a very different circumstance in every way, not the least of which is that Ronald Reagan presided for 8 years. He hasn't been president for 15 years. I was talking with one of his old friends and supporters, William F. Buckley. I happened to be riding up to New York with him on the train, and he was just amazed that 15 years after Reagan had left office, 10 years after he really left us with Alzheimer's, the power the meaning of his death, the need to recognize it, really speaks something to the consequentiality of Ronald Reagan, who, we can argue politics all you want, or policies. I will say it again, this is the most consequential political figure in the White House since Franklin D. Roosevelt, and that's one of the reasons why so many thousands of people turned out and why we have been covering this almost nonstop for a week, Wolf.
You know, Jeff, as we see this plane continue to taxi and the crowds that have gathered at the Point Mugu Naval Air Station in California getting ready to have a little glimpse at this historic moment, set the stage what we should be looking for later tonight at sunset Pacific time, California time, when the final event of this week-long period of national mourning occurs.
I have a feeling that that is going to be one of the more emotional moments of this whole week. I sort of said for several days that I don't know that people really feel a sense of loss because he had a full life. He was the oldest ex-president. He died peacefully after a battle with Alzheimer's. But there's something about a burial at sunset that marks a finality that I think even for those of us who have looked at this more like a commemoration or celebration, that is the last possible final farewell. That is the last time Nancy Reagan, who has been having very emotional moments each time she approaches the casket and then leaves it, this will be the very last one. And so I think even for those of us who see this as a commemoration, that's where the emotional punch may well come as the sun sets and the president is laid to rest. Well,
Thanks so much, Jeff. Let's check in now with James Kuhn, who was an executive assistant to the president during his presidency. We have been riveted by Nancy Reagan over the last 5-6 days, her composure, her dignity, her grace. Today, I was almost tortured watching her, particularly as she reached down, bent over to kiss the casket. And at one point, it almost appeared as though she was saying something to the casket. You knew them both for many, many years. How do you react to those pictures that we've seen?
Well, Paul, I think she probably was talking to him. In fact, I'm sure she was. And as I look at the footage here of 28,000 pulling up with Mrs. Reagan and President Reagan's body on board, I'm thinking what must be going through her mind, and my sense is that there has to be somewhat of a state of peace of mind right now that she's feeling, because I know one of her concerns over the past few years has been that something could possibly happen to her and that she wouldn't be here to be with Ronnie, to make sure that he had the care that she wanted him to have until the final day. That was very important to her. The right doctors, the right support personnel, and she watched that very closely. And she wanted to ensure that she was here until he was gone. So there has to be some peace of mind there that worked out for her.
Although a number of her friends have been quoted as saying that it has been very difficult for her to even think about letting go over the last several days, although she's had a decade to prepare for this possibility, one can only imagine maybe what a state of shock she's still in.
I saw that on Monday when she was at the library and leaned over the casket, and it hit me very hard then, the impact that no matter how long you prepare for this and what goes through your mind, the pain and suffering that she was feeling at that time, it hit me very hard.
I noticed you said that it was so important for her personally, Jim, to be around at this time of national mourning, and this was so important for her to say goodbye to Ronnie, as she called him. You told me a few days ago that one of the things you learned from her was how to eat in really, really small portions.
It's amazing when people talk about how frail she looks today. I thought she was a tower of strength when I saw her today at the National Cathedral. She looked fantastic. She looked strong. She looked the way that President Reagan wanted her to look today. And but more specifically, she amazed me as First Lady when we would travel around the country overseas in hotel suites. She would, her portion of food would be 10% of what a normal human being would get, it seemed. And she would eat about 5% of that. And I learned from Nancy Reagan that you don't have to eat a lot to survive. And but yet a very strong woman.
Very disciplined woman.
Yes.
and that discipline certainly is coming through this week. How much of this event, these past several days, did she personally coordinate?
Well, she has overseen this from the very beginning. As they planned the funeral years ago, Nancy Reagan's touch has been on everything, a touch of elegance from beginning to end. So she looked at this very carefully, and she had a major role in it at the outset.
It is so interesting to compare and contrast her image today with her image when she was First Lady. And we all recognize that every First Lady has been a lightning rod at some point of her husband's presidency. But this is someone whose, it strikes me, whose reputation has been completely changed by this very long journey she's had to travel with her husband.
I think so too, but yet it was unfair as First Lady. She had the reputation and various connotations or nicknames or whatever that were negative. But Paula, it was never because of Nancy Reagan. If she had to speak up, if she had to get on the phone with the Chief of Staff or myself or anybody and things weren't going right, it was always because of her roommate or Ronnie. It was never because of herself. And I have to tell you, whenever I got a phone call, it was never because we had done, I think, our work perfectly. We usually had missed something or the president was not served well, and it was pointed out, and we corrected it. She was doing her job.
When's the last time you had an opportunity to talk with Nancy Reagan?
I saw her in March, late March, and spent an hour with her in their home. President Reagan was there. I didn't see him, of course, but you felt his presence while we spoke.
How so?
You just had this sense that he was looking over his shoulder, that strength of Ronald Reagan, and we were with his beloved Nancy. And we had a delightful discussion about Washington, about stem cell research. We talked a lot about Ronald Reagan, about all of his achievements, about the personal side of him. It was a delightful hour.
Let me explain to our viewers, Jim, Paula, what we're seeing right now. The crowds have gathered at the Point Mugu Naval Air Station, not far from the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley in Southern California. People have come with their children, a lot of young kids here. The front of the plane will be where the former First Lady will exit. She'll walk down the stairs together with her children and other guests who have made this flight across the country from Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington, D.C. They will walk down. They'll be received there. There will be a brief service ceremony here. To the rear of the plane, in the belly of the plane, a truck is already pulled up. That will bring the casket down, and then the color guard will eventually move that casket over to a hearse for the journey, for the drive over from Point Mugu, the Naval Air Station here, over to the Presidential Library. You see the family minister showing up with the military, and Nancy Reagan, Paula, will be walking down those stairs shortly. She'll be escorted, I want our viewers to remember this, U.S. Major General Galen Jackman, who's been with her since Sunday. She will walk down. She will walk down those stairs, escorted by the military escort officer who has been at her side virtually every minute since this ordeal began.
I can't even imagine the stories he might have to share someday about the experience of having her lean on him. I'm sure he's provided a great deal of comfort to her.
He had a big role. He had no question about it. When I see this footage also, I think of the library and how President Reagan used to refer to it. He called it his museum. He didn't call it a library. He didn't call it presidential library. He'd say, well, this will go in the museum, or we'll do that at the museum. And it also makes you reflect, too, when they made the decision where their final resting place would be. It was the day of the groundbreaking, November 21st of 1988, when they had the ceremonial groundbreaking at the library, that they decided then on the trip down, driving down the small mountain, the hilltop, that would be their final resting place.
And the minister we see at this arrival ceremony is the Reverend Michael Wenning. He's a close personal friend of the family.
Yeah, I do not know him, but he has a major role there today, and you could see how important he was at the beginning of the week with the footage and the photos of Mrs. Reagan in the casket, and how he provided the support that she needed at that time, very much so.
We so often hear living presidents, when questioned about their legacy, say, I'll leave it up to the historians to define that. In any of your conversations with the president after he left office, Did he ever tell you what he hoped his legacy would be as seen through the history books?
He did not. He was so low-key about that, and I'll give an example of his unassuming nature. My family and I, we were in San Francisco. We drove down to see him at the ranch early one evening, shortly after he gave one of his last great speeches at the Republican National Convention in Houston in 1992, which was just magnificent. And we were praising him, Nancy and I and my wife and I were praising him over the great speeches he gave, and he was sitting in the chair blushing over that praise and didn't have a response, couldn't say a word, just very shy, and we were embarrassing him. But no, that wasn't Ronald Reagan. He could not talk about his legacy.
We're going to take a pause now and listen to the ceremony as it unfolds.
Mrs. Reagan, in holding the arm of Major General Galen Jackman in the United States military, he's not simply a military protocol officer or an escort officer. He's a warrior. This is a soldier who served in an elite special operations commando unit, has seen his time in battle, but over these past several days, Paula, since Sunday, his mission has been simply this: to do whatever he can to make Mrs. Reagan's life a little bit easier.
As she got off the plane just now, she repeated the scene that we saw as she left Andrews Air Force Base, where she took the time to wave to the crowd. At Andrews Air Force Base, in fact, she blew a kiss to the crowd. She's now taking that opportunity, an opportunity she did not have earlier in the week, particularly as the procession made its way to the rotunda, when people screamed out loud. The only thing breaking the silence was, "We love you, Nancy Reagan."
And she's followed up down those stairs, Mrs. Reagan, by her friend Margaret Thatcher, who, as we all know, has not been in the best of health over these past several months, and a series of minor strokes, but she did insist not only on coming to the United States, Paula, and enduring this transatlantic flight, but also insisted on joining Mrs. Reagan to fly back to California. What a gesture.
It's a wonderful gesture of friendship, and she talked a lot about the roots of their friendship during her eulogy today, and she used some beautiful language describing Ronald Reagan and his convictions, and talked about the enormous impact she felt he had in bringing the Cold War to an end.
Did you put online that? It's taken to that to go and bring competition and bring to the town this like that. We'll go to their rear. Very friendly.
There are a couple different efforts underway, one by the U.S. military, one by the state of California, to share with the Reagan family much of what is being said around the country right now. The U.S. military is going to gather some of Tolenson's books, not only collected here in Washington today from all over the country, and in the state of California, certain places, they are handing out blank pieces of white paper, 8.5 by 11, and asking the state citizens to fill them out. And it's quite remarkable what some people have said. One man named Gio said, "A great man that made possible a future for many immigrants to become U.S. citizens." In San Jose, someone wrote that the former president was a man, no American president ever did more to bring back pride to the people and the American military. And one would imagine, Jim Coon, that would be something that would be extremely comforting to Nancy Reagan down the road when she finally has the opportunity to absorb the enormity of what she's been through over the last 6 days.
This will mean a lot to her, knowing that she has the support and that President Reagan, at the end, had this kind of support, this outpouring of the sorrow that people have shown, and yet the upbeat side that they have conveyed throughout this week. That's something that will never leave her mind. Very, very significant to her.
This is the motorcade that will bring the casket to the Presidential Library in Simi Valley, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. There's the hearse with the casket inside. It will be followed by the limousine carrying Nancy Reagan. Our Larry King is already over at the Presidential Library. Larry, give our viewers a sense of what you see and what you know is about to happen there.